CNN's Mohammed Jamjoom is standing by in Beirut. But let's start with our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. She has the very latest. Barbara?
Wolf, I think you just laid it out. This war getting more dangerous by the day. As Iraqi army forces battle ISIS militants west of Baghdad, there is disturbing evidence the war is now not limited by borders. In the Iraqi town of Al-Qaim, the carnage of Syrian airstrikes inside Iraq. At least 57 Iraqis killed, more than 120 wounded up and down Iraq's border with Syria after Syria launched airstrikes inside Iraq. The U.S. doesn't know yet if Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, who fights ISIS inside Syria, has formally joined forces with Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's regime. Iran also deepening its involvement, flying surveillance drones over Iraq, sending in its own military advisors, just as the U.S. does the same. With the Iranians now trying to mobilize thousands of Shia militiamen in southern Iraq, the war is widening.
Widened from what? Widened from 5 minutes ago, an hour ago, yesterday? It's been widened, obviously, in the last days with the reports of some people from Iran being engaged in Iraq, with perhaps even some Syrian activities therein. That's one of the reasons why government formation is so urgent.
Secretary of State John Kerry is pushing for a new government to be formed to unify Shia, Sunni, and Kurds. Maliki avoided that issue even as he rejected forming an emergency government to deal with the crisis.
It is no secret to all Iraqis the dangerous goal behind the call for the formation of a national salvation government, as they call it. It is simply an attempt by those who rebel against the Constitution to end the young democratic process.
Look, as the U.S. watches this, Wolf, they see ISIS beginning to get a bit stretched out on the battle lines. They may have to halt for a while before they go much further and regroup and consolidate their positions. But perhaps the real question now is whether Iraqi forces can launch an effective counteroffensive, push ISIS back, gain territory, and even hold on to what they already have as part of the Iraqi security forces.
Clearly, the U.S. Wants to go after these ISIS terrorists. The Iranians want to do the same thing. The regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria want to do the same thing. Is there really any coordination between the U.S., Syria, and Iran, given these three countries' very, very different goals, if you will?
You know, it's absolutely fascinating. You know, with this war now, would Washington, the Syrians and the Iranians band together in some sort of cooperative effort? We're told no, that there is no military cooperation, intelligence coordination with Syria or Iran. But mighty strange bedfellows out there. And it could come to pass, clearly, that there may be some opportunity when they will communicate about what is going on. If airstrikes were to be launched by the U.S., clearly there would be an effort by the U.S. to make sure everybody in the region knows what the U.S. military would be up to after it happens. They want no miscalculation here.
You're absolutely right. All right, Barbara, stand by with us. I want to bring in CNN's Mohammed Jamjoom. He's joining us from Beirut. Mohammed, how much concern is there in the region this war could get a whole lot wider?
Well, there's a lot of concern. In fact, in all my years reporting from the region, I've never seen as much concern from the various countries in the region, from my sources in those countries, that possibly a region-wide war could be sparked because of what's going on in Iraq. And the problem is the more countries like Iran intervene, the more you'll see countries like Saudi Arabia, which is the arch rival of Iran in this region, try to figure out a way to interfere in that war as well. They're going to have to do something if they think Iran is getting deeper involved in the Iraq crisis. And when that happens, you'll see sectarian divisions deepen across this region at a time when they've already been boiling over and they're as deep as they've ever been. Wolf?
Mohammed, there's been a bombing in Beirut. That's where you are. What can you tell us about this bombing? What does it mean?
Wolf, this is the latest in a string of bombings this past week. I can tell you that this city, this country is on edge. And now the burning question on the lips of so many in Lebanon is ISIS now on the attack in Lebanon as well? The third suicide bombing to rock Lebanon in less than a week. A scene of panic and chaos. Even security forces were left scrambling and injured. Tonight, tensions very much on the rise here in Beirut after a suicide bomber blew himself up in one of the hotels just behind us on this street. Now, police have cordoned off the area. They're fearful that there might have been a secondary explosive device planted somewhere nearby. Residents of Lebanon fear even more violence, especially with ISIS posting announcements like this one online.
And we will go to Iraq in a few days and we will fight there, bi'idhnillah, and come back. And we will even go to Jordan and Lebanon with no problems.
Worry here is growing.
I'm really very concerned because for a simple reason that the stability in Lebanon is very fragile.
Analysts say ISIS and other jihadist groups could easily take advantage of the fractured government, weakened security forces, and deep sectarian divisions here. Since last year, a rising tide of Sunni anger towards Shiite militant group Hezbollah has been to blame for several car bombs targeting Shiite-populated areas in and around Beirut. Now, blood is being shed once more, and many suspect ISIS is behind it. On Friday, a car bomb targeted a security checkpoint in the Bekaa Valley. And another worrying sign. Angry Islamists in nearby Tripoli held a demonstration. At one point, chants of support for ISIS could clearly be heard.
I'm worried about is this collapse, total collapse of the Lebanese institution. The excellent turf for these movements are a dislocated state and a divided society, which is the case in Lebanon.
Wolf, everybody I spoke with on the scene of that suicide blast tonight said that while they're worried that this is going to continue, they also hope that it's going to stop. And they all said that they have no doubt that this is coming to Lebanon and hitting Lebanon now because of what's going on in Iraq.
The spillover from Iraq, from Syria, hitting Lebanon, could be hitting Jordan as well. The region clearly worried. Mohammed, thanks very much. Up next, as Iraqi troops head into battle, they're now getting some help, as we just pointed out, from both Iran and Syria. So does this mean the United States is actually siding with its own foes? I'll ask the Senate Intelligence Vice Chairman, Senator Saxby Chambliss. He's here in the Situation Room. Also, the former Jordanian Foreign Minister Marwan Muasher, he's here as well. Plus, what Hillary Clinton meant to say. Iraqi troops go off to battle. They're getting help in their fight against these ISIS insurgents. They're getting some airstrikes from Syria, drone surveillance and weapons coming in from Iran, and support from U.S. military advisors. About 150 U.S. military advisors are already on the ground. The president says up to 300 will be deployed. Joining us now, Republican Senator Saxby Chambliss of Georgia. He's the vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and CNN Middle East analyst Marwan Muasher. He's the former Jordanian foreign minister, one-time ambassador to the United States. Gentlemen, thanks very much for coming in. Syria goes ahead. They use their warplanes to attack ISIS targets inside Iraq. But in the process, they wind up killing about 50 civilian Iraqis, men, women, and children, injure scores of others. What is going on here?
Well, that's the dilemma that the White House is facing right now, Wolf, and has been facing for the last several days regarding airstrikes. If you have airstrikes in congested areas, you're going to have collateral damage. You would hope you could get all of these bad guys out in one area that's isolated, but that's just not going to happen now. The unfortunate part about this is that this has bled over from Syria into Iraq. Now we have a terrorist organization that controls more territory than any terrorist organization that we've ever seen. Gives them a perfect breeding and training ground for operations as well as other terrorists that will seek to kill and harm Americans. And the real fear we have, of course, is that it may bleed over to Jordan next.
A key U.S. ally.
A very key U.S. ally. And who knows where it's going next? I mean, these folks want a caliphate. They want to control Jordan. They want to control Lebanon, Israel. They're a large, nasty group of folks.
Ambassador, you agree with that assessment?
Well, I think, of course, we have all reason to worry. They are terrorists and they are extremely radical and trying to exert influence over a large part of territory. I would caution a little bit against, over worried that they will spill over into Jordan. Remember, they're going to have to face a very strong army with planes, with tanks, a very seasoned army in the Jordanian army, and they don't have the social supporting environment.
Because I've heard these reports that there are already in some of these refugee camps, and as we know, there are hundreds of thousands of refugees inside Jordan right now coming in from Iraq, coming in from Syria. There already are ISIS agents inside trying to foment trouble.
You actually have ISIS supporters as individuals, not just in refugee camps. Even among some Jordanians, there are supporters of ISIS, but these number only in the few hundred. They don't have the same supporting environment that, for example, they do in Iraq, where the Sunni community feels frustrated and marginalized and has allowed them to achieve military successes. We are talking about a group of people that might have 10,000 fighters at most. They're not going to be able to fight 3 countries at the same time. And so while they are certainly a huge security threat, as the senator said, with them exerting influence over a large piece of territory, I would still caution against, thinking that they are going to be able to achieve these military successes.
Is Nouri al-Maliki, the prime minister of Iraq, the man to get the job done now, or should he simply move on?
Well, he certainly has not provided the kind of leadership that we need to get through this crisis, Wolf. The problem is that he just his party just had a pretty significant election. And he is the choice of his party, at least right now, to be the prime minister. So he's being very defiant, very stubborn about stepping down. But there's going to have to be a political solution on that side. At the same time, we have a military solution on the other side. Otherwise, stability there and the violence there is going to continue.
The Secretary of State, John Kerry, goes to Baghdad. It's not an easy thing. It's dangerous to go. Goes there, meets with Nouri al-Maliki, appeals to him to create a national unity government. Nouri al-Maliki goes on television today and says, no way, we're not doing that. That would be a violation of the Iraqi constitution, basically telling the United States, never mind.
Maliki has ruled in a very exclusionist way and probably will continue to do so. But as the senator said, this is going to take a political process. It is not about a military affair only.
Do they have time for this? Because it looks like that clock is ticking very quickly.
I think things will get worse before they get better. I think a likely scenario would be that people within Maliki's parties are going to come to terms with the fact that there needs to be a political process, and maybe ask Maliki to step aside and put somebody from the same party, because they did win the elections, but somebody who is more open-minded and is ready to give the other forces, the Sunni community in particular, a more meaningful say in running the affairs of Iraq.
How weird is it, Senator, that Syria, Bashar al-Assad's air force and military, they're getting involved in Iraq right now, going after these ISIS terrorists. Iran and their Revolutionary Guard, they're getting involved, going after these ISIS terrorists. And maybe the United States, the President of the United States may authorize, I don't know if he will, U.S. airstrikes or drone strikes or something along those lines. I don't know if you have inside information, but this is a very unusual situation.
Yeah, the American people just are having a very difficult time understanding the fact that here we are, an adversary of Iran from a nuclear weapons standpoint. We're on the opposite side in Syria, and we may wind up being supportive and on the same side against ISIL. So it is extremely complex. It's extremely sensitive. But as we head into Ramadan this week, something's going to have to give, and it's going to have to give in the short term. Otherwise, I don't see any way out of it.
Well, what do you recommend? Should the U.S. get involved militarily in Iraq right now?
Well, I think it depends on what you say from a military standpoint. If we went in with airstrikes right now, we would kill too many civilians along with military. That's going to cause more problems than it will solve. The advisors that are on the ground are going to report back to the president when they gather the intel that they're sent there to gather. They're going to talk about command and control with ISF and see if they cannot garner some spine among the troops that we spent so much money and so much time training to fight these guys, to stand up to them. And if they will do that, then obviously that would be the solution, and it'd be without an American military presence.
Is there a military solution here?
I don't think so. I think you have to differentiate between ISIS, which has to be fought by all means, and between the Sunni community, where you have to find a political solution. So weaken ISIS militarily to every point possible, but then work out a political solution.
And you're confident that the Jordanian military, unlike the Iraqi military, which so much of it simply crumbled in the face of some terrorists coming in, the Jordanian military is resolute and can get the job done to protect the kingdom?
I'm very confident of the Jordanian military capabilities as well as of the Jordanian population opposition to these people.
Is there a real threat from these ISIS terrorists to the United States, to the homeland here? Some of your colleagues in the Senate keep saying these guys, if you give them free rein in Syria, Iraq, maybe elsewhere, what they're going to do is plot terrorist attacks against targets in Europe and eventually in the United States. Do you believe that?
Well, remember that ISIS, ISIL, whichever one you call them, it broke off from core al-Qaeda because they're more extreme than al-Qaeda. They've been in Syria fighting. We know that there have been some Americans inside of Syria fighting. We know that an American inside of Syria strapped a suicide vest on himself and blew himself up. If those folks that have now bled over into Iraq have the opportunity to train Americans to come back to the United States to carry out missions like that, you bet they will do it.
Does the U.S. intelligence community believe that's a realistic scenario?
It is always a possibility, and our worst fear, that someone would get into this country who is from this country, or someone in this country that's grown up here would carry out a terrorist act like that. And with the free movement into and out of Syria right now that's so very difficult to control, I think the possibility within the intelligence community is that it's very possible.
Senator Chambliss, thanks very much for coming in. Marwan Mawasher, thanks to you as well. We'll stay on top of this story. Much more coming up later. When we come back, though, for the second time in 2 weeks, Hillary Clinton is now clarifying some controversial comments made about her wealth, what she's now saying to critics who suggest she's simply out of touch, and why the House Speaker John Boehner now says he's planning to sue President Obama. We have new details coming into the situation.
In Iraq
When folks think about what they get from a